I'll probably talk for about 45 minutes, so I hope to leave plenty of time for discussion at the end. And I want to cover a few key themes. One would be just a general sort of overview of the county and its landscapes. I want to talk about the value of rivers as movement corridors. I want to talk about the question of citizen scientists and monitoring of water quality, and also I want to focus on the question of water pricing and something I've called donut tariffs, which comes out of the book. I mean, there are plenty of other aspects that we could get into discussion, and I'm not necessarily holding myself up as an expert in those matters, although I do feel quite well informed. Sorry, I should have said a little bit of background probably before, but I was working at East Herts for nearly 30 years in planning policy and planning development management. So I do have expertise as a town planner and as a qualified urban designer. I do a lot of walking. I've been to a lot of places, and I just try and learn as I go, really, and reflect on that. So I do have strong views, but I try to carry them relatively lightly, and try and take on board what else I can learn from others as I go. So I hope the book and this discussion will be a useful contribution to the debate about our chalk streams and our rivers. I probably don't need to say to people here how significant chalk streams are to Hertfordshire, and how significant they are internationally. I think the walk and the subsequent journey I did in research and writing increased my appreciation of chalk streams and their qualities. Hertfordshire as a county is entirely made up of rivers that are chalk streams. I mean, here as an overview of the county, I found myself walking. There's sort of three natural groupings, if you like. There's a grouping to the east that all flow down into the Lee. There's a grouping to the west and the south flowing down into the Colne, and then there's a few streams that on the northern chalk slope which flow to the north. And so as I did the walk and then as I wrote it up, I did put them into these groupings geographically, but equally I found as I walked each of the rivers, they all seemed to have slightly different stories to tell. They were in slightly different states of disrepair, or some, for instance, the Chess River, which was a complete new find for me, I think is one of the only rivers in the county that scored a good ecological condition when it was when we had all the data released back in 2020, I think it was, by the Environment Agency, that showed we were going backwards actually in terms of general river health condition. So Hertfordshire is as a topographically is a rather strange place in some ways, because as much as it's characterised by all these chalk streams, it takes a little bit of them on the northern side, which are sort of slightly disaggregated, if you like, from the other groupings of rivers. And of course it sits very close to London, so it's always been influenced by its proximity to London and the wealth of London. And over the centuries, we've had the royal courtiers, people connected with royalty, of course, aristocracy. Then we've had moneyed merchants, and probably more recently people wealthy from the city, finding their country retreats in Hertfordshire. And some of the rivers, for instance, like the Mimram particularly, but are very much sort of captured by these private estates. And then, of course, over time, sometimes these private estates can go public, as we've seen at Panshanger, in a very rather long circuitous route. But Panshanger to Hertford was a huge country house, and then after a cycle of gravel extraction and planning conditions, it's now become a huge park for wide public enjoyment, and quite an asset, I would say, to the town. So we've got the Chilterns area of outstanding natural beauty, which sort of creeps into the western side of Hertfordshire, and so there's a bit of an overlap of Chilterns groups which are also active on campaigning on chalk streams, because they run out to the counties to the west. I mean, just a few pictures really to cover the good, the bad and the encouraging. I mean, some of the best scenes I saw were along the River Mimram. A number of people will be familiar with this location, which is just sort of west of Pansanger Park on Archers Green, and I captured it on a beautiful sunny day, and the water felt perfectly clear to be playing around in, and this is a very popular location. Although it's been in private ownership, it's been a popular location for people to go and picnic and for families to enjoy. And I think the Hertford and Middlesex Wildlife Trust has been trying to buy the site, and perhaps somebody can update me on progress on that. This is the Chess River, actually my first sight of it, and I was immediately struck by really the strength of flow and the quality of the water. Well, it's not a particularly sunny day, but even as I arrived, I think a fish leapt out of the water in front of me, and that felt quite unusual and quite encouraging. The house at the back there is was a watercress farm, one of the last that we had on River Chess. And then Woodhall Park, near to Watton at Stone, been some terrific work going on there recently. So here's the River Bean. And it's a landscape park for the main house there, but I think after some flash flooding after a storm a few years back, there's been a project of the water company with the Environment Agency and the landowner to restore and actually to provide a new channel for aquatic life, and to restore a gentler morphology to the river, to improve the habitat for the kind of wildlife that we would hope to see along rivers. And I know water vole have been released there as well, and they're hoping that they'll take hold there. Up at Ashwell we have the River Ree, and I was often walking trying to find the source of chalk streams, and the Ordnance Survey map would say source of the chalk stream, but of course you tend to realise that there are many sources to rivers because there are tributaries, and why does one particularly become the source and not another? But when you go to the Ree at Ashwell, it's very clear where the source is, and it arises here right in the middle of the village, and as a stream it flows round all year round. I think there is an agreement for it to be reinforced by pumping as well, so that the flow doesn't diminish. But it's a location where families will go down and children will play in the shallow waters there. Rather magical place actually, just below the main high street in Ashwell. And yeah, Wind in the Willows. I mean, we can't get more English and gentle and greener than that, can we? And I mean, these chalk streams are as quintessentially English as Wind in the Willows. And then on the downside, we've all heard about the problems of abstraction. This was actually the day that I tried to walk the length of the Ash River, and the Ash is probably one of the most depleted that we've got in the county. I think half of the length in the summer of 2020 had dried up, and when you look at that channel and realise how much water potentially might flow down that river, and then to see it like that all completely dried up is quite stark, really. And yeah, it was quite a concern just to see how much of the river had dried up. I think all the way down to Little Haddam. This is the golf course just on the River Ver, near to Redbourne, and that the particular spill I came across here was particularly unsightly. I did report it, and I did sort of raise some queries. I never quite found out exactly what had happened there. Maybe I should have spent more time following it up. But whether it was a failed cesspit, whether it was, something from sewage treatment works, whether it was some unauthorised dumping, who knows? But it was really quite unpleasant and shocking to see that. And here's another location. It's not uncommon at times to find patches where there's relatively small amounts of water and algal growth because of the amount of nutrients and phosphates that get into our rivers. This is near to a treatment works at just to the north of Letchworth, and it's the Pix Brook. And this treatment works had, over the years, had quite a lot of complaints about odours from it. Actually, the complaints have seemed to have been tackled, so they didn't seem to be too much record of current problems, but the stream certainly didn't look healthy, as you can see from the picture there. Bringing back the Bullburn, something much more encouraging at Hemel Hempstead. This was a scheme of chalk stream restoration, and there's a bit of a before and after there on the information board. So this is actually a location on the Bullburn that runs to the south of Hemel Hempstead, and the chalk, that particular stream is much diminished by the fact that a lot of its water fed into the Grand Union Canal on its construction. But it had been channelled over the years, and there was an opportunity here to restore some of its gentler meanders and create more habitat and water areas. It should be said there's something about chalk streams that are so gentle that they don't have the capacity within themselves to restore themselves if they're just left to their own accord. So we actually do need to actively soft engineer if we're going to help them get back to something more intrinsically natural and original. This is the Gade as it runs through a shopping centre at the bottom end of Hemel Hempstead, and I think the scheme here had been designed to, I think it may well have been previously culverted that, so it was an opportunity at least for the stream to re-emerge and be appreciated within the town. Yeah, so another aspect of chalk stream rivers, I mean they do work as movement corridors, obviously because rivers are naturally sort of walker friendly in terms of gradients. There's no steep climbs, you're following the contours, and there are many existing rivers that we already use. There are a number of rivers in the county that you can walk along that offer cyclist movements. The towpaths as well along canalised sections provide good movement. But I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities for improving that. This just shows the route of the Lee running right through the county. If there is one river that seems to encapsulate or connect the whole of Hertfordshire, it's probably the Lee, because it's running right across west to east and then down into London. I'd promote the idea of it being a walking route, a leisure trail, a national trail actually, because you can probably in 3 or 4 days walk from Luton, the town on the Lee, where the Lee is born, and make it all the way down to the Thames. So I've done that in stages. I've not done it in one go, but I'm sure if it were promoted a little bit more as a national trail, and with better funding, waymarking, etc., and a few additional paths, there's an awful lot of history that you're going through as well. So there's lots of stories to be learned, and a very good, benign, healthy, active sort of holiday activity. And here's the Lee as it flows out of Hertfordshire under the M25. So most of the water that falls in the county disappears down the Lee at this point. So each of the chapters I've sort of done a introductory map that gives a clue as to where the river's running. This is the Chess River, and also the route that I walked. And as you'll see, with some of them, I was able to stay much closer to the river than others. On the Chess, there is the Chess Valley Walk, and a lot of it is extremely accessible and pleasant to walk. There are some sections where you're driven round the back, running through suburbs, etc. But there's also a problem around the M25. I suspect when they diverted the footway and put it within this high fencing alongside the M25, maybe it looked reasonable enough on a map, but it's a most horrible section to actually have to walk, because you've got all the noise and fumes of passing lorries for a few hundred metres there. So I do make some suggestions that somebody should try and find a better option than that. And then I've a few suggestions of additional pathways nearer to Hertford. Here I've made a couple of suggestions for the Lee itself. Hatfield Park doesn't have any rights of way running through it, but if there was one that I would encourage, it would be to follow the Lee at the top end. And then also we've got, when I walked down to Essendon, the lower Hatfield Road, the B158, is not really a very safe road to walk along at all, because it's one of those roads with speeding traffic, high hedges, no verges, so you're really quite exposed if you're walking along there. So I make some suggestions there for additional footways as an option. And this is the potential link along the river Rib Valley, which would connect Hertford and Thundridge and areas to the north. If it was there for cyclists, they could get onto all the quiet rural roads to the north as well if they were cycling out of Hertford, without having to negotiate some of the more hazardous, busier roads around. So I think that's a link that could be very beneficial to have. Here we are looking at the Mimram, and as I say, over the centuries, the Mimram had a lot of private houses built, which tended to sort of privatise the access to the river. And nationally, although we have terrific rights of way, I mean, Right to Roamers will tell you that we actually only have access to about 3% of the countryside, and I think of a similar sort of a figure of access to rivers. So only about 3% of our rivers are actually publicly accessible, and whilst we don't do too badly in Hertfordshire, it's probably not many more percentage points above that. And so here's some areas where I think we could improve access along the Mimram, and also for, at the end, coming into Hertford. And then drawing a little bit upon my work when I was with the East Hertfordshire Council, one of the more recent studies we did was the urban design strategy for the town centre. We brought in an urban design practice, Tibbles, to help us with this, and they came up with some very, there was a lot of engagement of people, so the ideas were shared with a wide range of what's that word, stakeholders, I think. I think the Hertford Civic Society were involved. And it's not rocket science. We know generally that if towns make the most of their rivers, it's something that tends to work very well. And historically, certainly in post-war era, 20th century, was a period when developments often happened with little regard to actually public access to the rivers. So more, I think over recent decades, there's been a shift to that. We're seeing now the Birchley Green Centre remodelled, where there'll be a better aspect to the river. There's actually, going on to the next slide, you can see some detail proposed here. So we do have quite good access in Hertford already, but there's Tibble's idea, which I think was well received, was to actually put in a link between the Wash and Dolphin Yard, and so they're thereby sort of creating a route that works for the new Hertford Theatre along the river, links Harton Common with the castle grounds, and gives people access and enjoyment of the river by walking all the way along it. So, a citizens' science army. Did I write that? Right. So, there's huge numbers of people who are getting involved in rivers, and this is all to the good. As I sort of looked at the different rivers, for instance, the Ver Society was established back in the 70s, 1976, and it's got a wonderful website, and it's clear that the bigger and the more established these river action groups are, the more influence they tend to have, even if they might be disappointed that there are still problems of drought and etc. I think the River Ver ran dry back in 1976, which was the impetus to. And there are huge numbers of people going out and removing non-native species, and here we have citizen scientists trained and funded, and I think it should be rolled out nationally. There's no way we're going to get the amount of data that we need on river quality by improving, much as we need to improve the resources in the regulators, the Environment Agency, etc., and much as those agencies have seen their resources diminished over recent years. I think there's a huge ability there to create the army of, if you like, of data collectors to improve our information about what's going on, and information will reliable information will definitely feed into political pressure and demand for action to do something about it. So this diagram just simply talks about what's actually having a negative impact on our water, and I think if you ask most people, they would probably say pollution from sewage spills was one there. It's obviously the one that captures all the headlines, and it is a really serious issue, but there are other issues that are important. I've mentioned already the modification of rivers, and the Chalk Stream partnership that has come together and produced this particular plan was saying river restoration is actually is as important as any other measure in terms of improving the quality of our rivers, and then addressing pollution from farms in agricultural areas. This is just a diagram that has shown what's been happening in terms of sewage spills over the last 5 or 6 years. There did seem to be a huge increase in reported spills, and as much as there's a problem of a combined sewer system, and the government has said it's incredibly costly to put right, and you can't put that all on the water consumer, it doesn't really explain why there was just such an increase, and I can't help thinking that it was a diminished threat of legal action, because and the law, remember, was a law that was established at the EU level, and as I'm afraid as we departed from the EU, we moved away from environmental standards that were becoming established, and we haven't really replaced them with anything. So that's my theory as to why there's an awful lot more sewage spill going on at the moment. And then Donut Terrace, which is I had a water use challenge, and one thing led to another as I did. I also last year read Donut Economics, which I kept hearing recommendations. I'm not an economist, but I think it's probably as good a book as I've ever read by an economist, so I would definitely recommend it to anyone who's interested in such things. I think she makes, not only does she make it understandable, but she just sort of calls out the orthodoxy, I think, and rubbishes, sadly, a lot of things that we hold to be almost sacrosanct, such as you know, the more GDP you produce, the happier you are, or something along those lines. So donut tariffs really follows an idea for a more of a tariff structure to the way water is priced. And in my water use challenge, I realised that the fixed charges become incrementally a very significant part of it, and we really need to have much more incentive built in, as well as a basic provision of water to everybody that, you know, shouldn't be dependent on ability to pay. Because no one should have their water supply cut off. That's just not correct under any kind of basic human rights. So this is the model within the donut economics, and it's the two concentric rings, the outer ecological ceiling and the inner ring is the social foundation. So it's basically finding that space between the limits of what our planet can cope with ecologically, but actually making sure that everybody has the essentials, what they need for a decent and comfortable and satisfactory life as the social foundation. I mean, I felt I was reasonably well informed about water use, but I think actually that the more I looked into it, I was astonished how much money and energy is spent cleaning up water to simply flush straight down toilets again. And there's no simple solution to this, but one of the ways I saved money was actually just by saving shower water and a bit of grey water recycling and using that to flush my toilet when it was something more less critical to flush, shall we say. And I think what I would also say is just running taps, general awareness. Maybe it's a sort of consciousness exercise as well, but I always find it very painful if I see people turning a tap full on and just as they wash their hands, and it just doesn't feel right. So we need to kind of make these kind of habits ingrained, I think. And this just illustrates my own water bill and the price reduction. But so although I made some savings as I reduced my water use by half, I think they were probably a bit. The graph doesn't actually quite show how limited my use was relative to other households, but I don't want to boast too much, but I felt like I could almost get a gold medal for water use there. So I think I was something like a third of a typical household of my size or something. And but as I say, the fixed charge was then becoming, I think, almost 3/4 of my bill. So I thought, well, that's, if I really wanted to be encouraged to reduce my use, surely there'd be more of an incentive there. And this is Affinity Water's estimations of where people are in terms of their use of water. So they sort of define different categories: super low users, super high users, and interestingly, when they talk about pricing strategies, their view is that with super high users, they're so wealthy that price controls, if they increase the price of water, it doesn't actually affect the amount of water that they'll use, which I was quite surprised at. A super high user will be using maybe 300 litres per person a day. I had managed to reduce my own use to 50 litres a day. I think this area of the country, we are one of the highest users, and that's partly based on wealth and aspiration, if you like. And it does have implications, because almost all the water that we use is abstracted from the chalk aquifers. So here's the donut tariff, where the suggestion is that of course everyone needs to be metered for this to be effective, and that currently we haven't got universal metering rolled out. But we're treating water as a precious resource, but we're also treating it as a basic human right. So everybody has a basic provision of up to 80 litres per person per day. And then above that you would have a lower charge beyond that, a higher charge. 150 litre I think is the current average, but anything above 150 litre a day you would see it as an excess charge. And the point about the excess use is that actually it's a form of pollution in itself. We need to see wasteful consumption as pollution, because there's no doubt that our rivers are impoverished by the amount of water that we take out of them through ground abstraction. And this is just a graph that shows relatively low reductions over the years of water consumption. I think most of the change is probably due to technologies, probably again it may well have something to do with EU directives about the efficiency of appliances, but not huge significant change, but an overall reduction of about 10 litres per person per day over 20 odd years. And if I did a word cloud, if you're wondering what's in the book, they're the words that keep coming across. But there are lots of ideas in there, and if you do want to get a copy, you've got an opportunity to buy some at a slightly discounted price today. So there we are. I hope you've enjoyed the talk, and if you're interested in the book, please get a copy, and I hope it stimulates the conversation and ideas for better rivers and better chalk streams in Hertfordshire.